Section 2.1, Intercepts, Symmetry, Graphing Key Equations. In this section, there are two major concepts, intercepts and symmetry. Along the way, we will graph some key equations. Now, for both of these topics, intercepts and symmetry, we are going to look at them in two different ways, okay? We're going to study both intercepts and symmetry from a graphical perspective, meaning that we're going to have a picture of a graph, and that's all we have to rely on to do our work and answer the question. And then we're also going to look at these concepts from an algebraic perspective, meaning there's no picture, there's only an equation or a formula to work with in order to get your answer, okay? We are going to spend the first half of this section on intercepts, and then we will switch gears and take a look at symmetry. Okay, so we're going to get started at the top of page 1. We're going to first look at intercepts from a graphical perspective. So under identifying intercepts from a graph, it says the points, if any, at which a graph crosses or touches the coordinate axes are called intercepts. Okay, so basically we're trying to figure out exactly what an intercept is. The x-coordinate of a point at which the graph crosses or touches the x-axis is called an x-intercept. The y-coordinate of a point at which the graph crosses or touches the y-axis is called a y-intercept. Okay, so basically what an intercept is, when you hear that word intercept, that's referring to both the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts of the graph of an equation. Okay, so the x-intercept is going to be the point or points where your graph intersects the x-axis, and your y-intercept is going to be the point or points where your graph intersects the y-axis. Now, if you remember, I'm going to draw you a little picture here. Which axis is which? Well, if you're drawing your axes, okay, let me go ahead and do that. So there's your horizontal axis, and then I'll go ahead and draw in the vertical axis. Okay, so here your axes look something like this. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so here's your axes. Okay, the horizontal one, the one that goes left or right, that's going to be your x-axis, and then the vertical axis, the one that goes up or down, that is your y-axis. Okay, so make sure you keep those straight. Okay, so what we're going to do in example 1, okay, I have some graphs for you. Okay, and for each graph, it says the graph of an equation is given. State each intercept as an ordered pair x, y. Okay, so all we're doing here, okay, each graph that you're given, you're identifying both the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts. Okay, and according to the directions, the way you're going to write down the answer, these points need to be stated as ordered pairs. Okay, like this. Okay, when you write down an ordered pair, the x-coordinate goes first, and then the y-coordinate goes second. Okay, all right, so here's our first picture in example 1a. Okay, the graph is given in blue. We're going to start, I guess, with the x-intercepts. Okay, so here is your x-axis. Okay, I highlighted that in yellow. Your x-intercepts are going to be the point or points where this graph crosses or touches the x-axis. Okay, so the blue graph is intersecting the x-axis right here at this point, and also here at this point. Okay, so you have two x-intercepts that we need to write down. Okay, this first point, if you write it down as an ordered pair, okay, the x value here is -3, okay, because on the x-axis that value is -3, and then the y value here, you're on the x-axis, so the y value here is 0. Okay, so that's going to be your x-intercept. That's one of them. Okay, and then this other point right here, okay, this point right here, the x-coordinate is 3, and again, since we're on the x-axis, that means that the y value is 0. Okay, so there are your two x-intercepts for this particular graph. Okay, now we need to identify the y-intercepts. Okay, so your y-axis, okay, is going to be this blue line. Okay, that's the vertical axis. So you need to be looking for the pointer points where the graph intersects the y-axis. Okay, and if you notice, the graph is made up of basically these two little blue arcs, and neither one falls on the y-axis. Okay, the graph does not intersect the y-axis at all. Okay, so in this situation, there are no y-intercepts, and that's okay. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and write none. Okay, so sometimes you can come across a graph that has just one intercept. It may have more than one of that type of intercept, or it could have no such intercept. Okay, so just write down none. This graph has no y-intercepts. Okay. All right, so here we go. Let's look at another one. Okay, here's example 1b. Same thing. You've got a picture of a graph. This graph represents some equation. We don't have that equation at our disposal, so we have to rely on the picture to answer the question. Okay, so if we're looking at the x-intercepts, we need to figure out where the graph crosses or touches the x-axis. Okay, so again, the x-axis is going to be the horizontal axis. So here's your x-axis. Okay, and we're trying to figure out where that blue graph is going to cross or touch the x-axis. Okay, now pay special attention to this particular graph. Okay, what's going on here as we move from left to right, this little piece, if you can see where my cursor is, this little piece is understood to be getting closer and closer to the x-axis, but it never touches or crosses it. Okay, so I'm going to make a note of that for you in case you're flipping back in your notes to remember this. Okay, so the graph gets closer and closer to the x-axis, and that's happening as you move to the right. So the graph gets closer and closer to the x-axis, but never crosses or touches it. Okay, you may have seen this before in a graph. This attribute is something known as a horizontal asymptote. Okay, you don't have to know that term right now. It will come up again later in the semester, but I'm just going to jot it down here. The x-axis is a horizontal asymptote. Okay, that just means that the x-axis is a horizontal line that the graph is getting closer and closer to, but does not cross or touch it. Okay, so since the blue graph never crosses or touches the x-axis, there are no x-intercepts here. Okay, so we're just going to write down none. Okay, all right, so y-intercept. Okay, so now we're going to look at the y-axis, which is our vertical axis. Okay, so does our graph cross or touch this vertical axis? Okay, and the answer is yes, right here. Okay, so you have one y-intercept. You need to state it as an ordered pair. Okay, so we're going to write down the x-coordinate first. This point is on the y-axis itself, so its x value is 0, and then on the y-axis it falls at -1, so its y-coordinate is -1. Okay, so that is the only y-intercept because that's the only place that this graph crosses or touches the y-axis. Okay, let's try a couple more.